All right, class. These are instructions for those of you that are in the group that has to produce a crime board or a mind map. You are going to deal with the key historical question. Andrew Jackson, was he a sinner or a saint? Was Andrew Jackson and his actions when he was president fitting to have the title Hero of the Common Man, or were his actions more becoming of a king? Remember, ultimately, what we want to do, the final product here, will be to produce an essay. This essay needs a thesis statement in which you will take a position on this key historical question with Andrew Jackson. And you are going to develop that thesis statement throughout those 3 body paragraphs using evidence and elaborating on the evidence with some quality analytical statements. To start to develop an argument, anytime you want to produce an essay, I think the first thing you need to do is create or find some evidence here. So the evidence that you need to consider for this essay, for this question, it can come from the textbook scavenger hunt. It can come from the primary sources, or it can come from the packet that I gave you here at the beginning of class. I think that this packet is something that you guys need to look through and go over. It deals with some items here that you're going to have to consider and include in your essay that the textbook and the sources don't necessarily do a fantastic job elaborating on or going into much depth. So the first step you need to do is, when you're collecting evidence, have a sheet of paper out, put on the top of it historical evidence. I would write out the key historical question as well, and your job is to pull out and to find at least 20 to 30 pieces of evidence that would be appropriate to consider for this question. You don't have to explain it. You can literally just write out 1 through 10, make 3 rows, right? 1 through 10, 11 through 20, 21 through 30, and you need to write out, items that you would use, factual evidence that you would use in an essay dealing with Andrew Jackson and this question. The second step in producing an argument is that you have to start to connect these facts together into your body paragraphs, and this is where the crime board is going to come in, or the mind map will come in. This is going to allow you to start to connect or to develop connections between primary sources and evidence from the textbook and the packet. Your job is to produce a crime board for the legacy of Andrew Jackson, designed to highlight any connections between the key events of, or contrast between the key events of his administration. You are going to present this crime board, or you're going to present these connections visually in a mind map or a crime board, which you see an example of right behind me, and we'll look at that here in just a moment. All right, so what I would do is, in your groups, I would take this example and use it as a model or a template for how you want your crime board to look. This was something that my seniors did, dealing with the years in between World War I and World War II. And so this is something that you can do in a similar fashion. I would write down the question somewhere on this paper. They wrote it down in the bottom right-hand corner. And they started to look at the historical evidence, and they put them on index cards, right? And so I have some index cards. You can also cut up sheets of notebook paper, and I would write out those terms of those pieces of historical evidence. Remember, you should have about 20 to 30, and I would write those out onto the cards. What you need to do now is you need to start categorizing or grouping these cards into categories, or into like what you would maybe even call themes here. You want to group your pieces of evidence in some way which they all share a common characteristic or a trait or a theme. And so you can see Around here, their themes or their categories would be something dealing with Germany, France, Great Britain, the USSR, and then down here, the United States. So, you've collected your evidence, you've written down the index cards, and you start to group these pieces of evidence together. You haven't taped anything on here yet. You have just, started to do some dry fits here, and you started to look at the groups that you have and you labeled it, using a theme that it represents or some sort of category. But then when you're writing an essay, you have to have some sort of logical progression to your essay. Remember, you're trying to develop an argument here, so you can't have these facts in an isolated manner. They have to have some sort of connection between them. They have to relate back to this thesis statement or this overall argument that you're trying to make about Andrew Jackson. Essentially, your stance on the key historical question. And also those paragraphs, body paragraph 1, body paragraph 2, body paragraph 3, also should, they all should have some sort of connection between each other as well. There should be a thread to your argument, the process or the sequence of your overall argument. So what you want to do is you want to take the yarn and you want to start to connect the facts within each body paragraph, and you're doing that through the yarn, right? And so Germany through the Treaty of Berlin, right? Or Germany through Stresemann, through fulfillment. The yarn goes from historical evidence to historical evidence, and it's highlighting those connections. That yarn can also, it doesn't have to stay within the category. You see here that, some of these key terms can relate to other categories. And so, they went from, let's see here, Germany to the Treaty of Berlin, but the Treaty of Berlin is also connected to the United States. The United States is also connected to the Locarno Treaty, which is connected to France, and so they start to see and develop connections among multiple pieces of evidence here, and that's what you want to try to do. So if you're looking at this and you're trying to see this as a way to visually prepare yourself for an essay and for an outline, let's look at what you've done so far. You've written out the pieces of historical evidence. You have grouped them together in some sort of fashion into these categories, right, which would essentially be your body paragraphs. And you've created this logical progression here of how these facts are connected to each other, right? And you're showing that by the yarn. But we need analysis, right? Analysis or analytical statements. This is the how and why. How does the evidence here show that Andrew Jackson was a blank type of president, or why, or what is the importance of this evidence? Why is this piece of evidence significant? What resulted, all right, or what was the consequence from this piece of evidence that you have presented, and how does that consequence, right, help you answer your question? This is a difficult part, and this is gonna this is going to need some time to think about, and this is going to maybe require you to ask me some questions as well. But when you're coming up with these analytical statements, you're coming up with your analysis of how and why this evidence or these connections help answer your question. You want to write them on little sheets of paper like they've done, right? And you want to put them on the yarn that's connecting the two pieces of evidence. So, you have, let's see here, reparations and the French occupation of the Ruhr, right? Their connection that they've made is that the German and the USSR alliance was a direct threat to France. And so this was the connection they had between the two pieces of evidence. So what you would have is you would have a piece of evidence for Jackson, a piece of evidence for Jackson, and then right here in the middle would be your analysis, right? This was significant because this resulted in a consequence of this was, right? This shows, and then you would finish out your thought there. once you're done with this, you essentially have a visual representation of what your outline will be. And now you're just ready to write your outline, which we will take care of on Wednesday. Thanks a lot, and ask questions if you have any.